today. Most of the stuff we're going to cover, well, all the stuff we're going to cover today, is in relation to the database stuff that we briefly started on Friday. You'll have to excuse my voice. I was yelling at the TV screen too loud yesterday. Very interesting game. But in order to do all this stuff, we first have to cover Unix sockets and named pipes. So normally when we think of a service running on a computer somewhere, it's listening on a TCP port. You think of something like an HTTP server, file server, something like that, going through port 80, various other ports. On Unix, we can actually listen on something called a Unix socket, and that never actually hits the TCP stack. It immediately, it's kind of like a pseudo file almost. Remember, everything that we have on Linux is kind of, or is, in the Unix environment, a file in one way or another. All of our, even our TCP sockets, we could probably find them as files somewhere on our system. So for Unix sockets, basically what happens is I'm going to demonstrate kind of how it would work with named pipes. So Unix sockets are just like TCP sockets. You can have basically listening on one place and have multiple components talking to clients, multiple clients talking to the server and whatnot. But named pipes are kind of a simpler example. We have one client and we have kind of one either other client or other server. So what we can do is say mkfifo temp. Let's just say mkfifo pipe. And if we look in our disk here, we see we have this pipe created. I'm going to log out and log back in to a different user. And when we redirect things into that pipe, our command will actually block. It won't return right away, and it will wait for somebody else to read from that pipe. So cat pipe, we read ASDF from it. And then our command terminated. The concept behind Unix sockets are very similar, but it can go a number of different ways and maintain sessions between clients and between servers. And there's a lot of application logic that's involved in maintaining all of that, which is very similar to what would happen with TCP, but you don't have any of the overhead. It doesn't ever leave the host. None of the IP layer stuff ever gets done. It's just the raw data that's being sent over the Unix socket. So by default, what's happening with our MySQL and our Postgres databases is our clients are actually communicating over these Unix sockets. So even though we are listening, stat LTPN, we're listening for MySQL here, so that's 3306. We're listening for Postgres right here. By default, we're actually going to try and use those Unix sockets first before we try and use our TCP sockets. And we're going to get into why that is and how we can configure it. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, I'm going to show you what we're going to try and set up here, is we're going to try and set up something like this. So we have the internet, we have our basically application, and then we have our database on a separate host. So in order to do these kind of things, we are going to have to configure our other host for remote access. Regardless of which database we choose, they're both bound to localhost right now, so we obviously can't get data from them remotely. So what I'm going to try and do here, and I think I have everything set up the way it needs to be, is I have two VMs running on the same network here. This one's currently running our database, Ubuntu, and this is Ubuntu 2, and it's just running client, so I can say MySQL. And see here, actually, if we're just running the MySQL without the server running, it would say can't connect to local MySQL server through socket var run MySQL mysqld.socket. So that's where it would try by default. If we did something, the same with Postgres, it'd say could not connect to server, no such file directory, Unix domain socket, so on and so forth. And we'll get into how we could actually force a TCP connection here in a minute. But just remember, if I was to go back to our other box, MySQL, say access denied for user at localhost, it would automatically assume we want the same user as we're trying to log in with. So what I would say is, what do we got here? We say U, username, and then P, password. So U root, P. Remember, we generally don't want to type our passwords on the command line. Remember that will, I'll just log out here, just remember that will end up in our bash history. Not right now, but in a bit. So if we specify our passwords, just remember your bash history is a list of all the commands you've run. So somebody, again, hacks your box. You don't want that just laying around like that. So you can leave that off the command line and then enter the password right there. You'll be logged in. So again, that's over the Unix domain socket right now. We can actually, I believe, force the TCP socket by saying h localhost host, and by default MySQL allows you to log in as localhost or via TCP socket. So same thing with Postgres, PGSQL. So we're gonna have to again switch to the Postgres user. So I'm Postgres sudo I. I'll just do this a different way. So by default, Postgres requires you to be the same user ID for connecting over the Unix socket. So it's a little bit different for the TCP version, and we'll show how to force that. Just remember, you could switch user to Postgres, and then you could say PSQL, and you would be given this prompt right here. I messed up something here. PSQL. And you'd be given the prompt. But that's not exactly what we want to do all the time. We probably want to log in remotely. So I figured out how to do this now. Postgres also allows you to force a TCP socket just like MySQL. Again, just the same way as MySQL, we specify the host name. So this is me as a different user. I would say H and then our host, and then capital U and then our user. So H localhost, U Postgres. And there we can see we got logged in. T. Wrong way. T. And whatnot. So we're going to get into how we can configure these things a little bit more. And we're going to go through all the different files that actually allow us to do things. The other thing that's tricky about doing all of these things is, again, different syntax between MySQL and Postgres. So inside of our users on MySQL, we actually have to tell MySQL where that user is going to log in from. So before we had said at localhost. So if we say username at localhost, that means they'll be allowed to connect through the Unix domain socket, and they'll be allowed to connect through TCP originating from localhost. And that's usually good enough. For our example here, we're going to have multiple hosts that need to send data back in between each other. We're actually going to need to specify something here. So when we specify a %, that means all hosts are allowed. So anybody from anywhere can connect to it. And if it's in a local network, if it's never going to be touched, if it's behind some sort of third-party firewall, that's probably going to be fine. But we can actually specify a particular IP address here, 192.168.253.55 in this example, that would allow us to lock that down a little bit more. So Postgres is different. It doesn't actually associate locations in the users or anything. The users that we have all obtain the same permissions regardless, and we actually set their permissions outside of the SQL itself. We set it in these configuration files over here. So let's go ahead, let's look at MySQL. Let's turn on binding to all addresses. So it's going to involve us looking at this configuration file right here. We're going to look for this bind address directive, and we're going to switch that from localhost to 00000, 4 zeros. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll cd over to etc MySQL, MySQL conf.d, and it's MySQL d.cnf. So we have a number of different sections here. Actually looks pretty similar to a number of other configuration files we've seen before. And we look for bind address. Bind address right here. So we can see by default it is set to localhost right now. So what we can do is we can just copy that line, we'll comment out the old one, and then we will go ahead and set this to 0.0.0.0. And then what we'll go ahead and do is systemctl restart MySQL d, MySQL, and then we'll look and see what we're listening on. And we can see MySQL is now listening on all interfaces on port 3306. So let's get our IP address here, host name I. So this is 253.54. Over here is 253.55. So we'll say MySQL U, or H, I think it's H, right? H. 192.168.253.54. Let's try and log in as root, and then we'll try and prompt for a password. So when we do this, this isn't actually going to work because we haven't granted, or maybe it will work. Root might have login permissions remotely by default. I hope it doesn't, but it might actually. So okay, yeah, so that we see something like this. We see host Ubuntu 2 is not allowed to connect to this MySQL server. So the root would have had this right here set to localhost by default. So what we can actually do is we can log in over here, MySQL U root p password 1 exclamation point. Whatever, I guess it's going to be at the bottom, sorry about that. And then what we can say is grant all privileges on star.star, so that's our databases. This is all the tables in those databases. And we'll say root at, and we're going to say %, identified by password. And I think we can leave off the password since we've already set that before. To root at %, so that's again all hosts. So just try and run that. Yeah, it might be that root is a yeah, messing up here. So I think I might have to set that password there again. Alright, let's see if we can go ahead and log in now. The %, star star, and then %. might have to I don't think I'll have to restart. Oh, I need a flush. There's like a flush privileges, flush permissions, or something like that. That I have to do to actually get things to work, and I forgot about that. Flush privileges. That's not how you spell privileges. Privileges. And hopefully now it will work. Oh no, we still don't get it to work. I'm going to try and restart the server quick here. It's the last hope of getting it to work. Oh, this is interesting. I don't know if it's taking my username or not. Okay, yep, I need a lowercase u, of course. There we go. Now we got it logging in and working fine. Okay. Use WordPress. Show tables. Select star from A. We got nothing in there. So, yeah, basically what I had done here is I had said the wrong U, so I thought of uppercase U from Postgres and not lowercase u from MySQL. But I think you would also have to have flush permissions here. So in addition to running this one, you would also have to say flush from privileges, however that's spelled. And that's how you would go about changing that. So again, you might want to change this to one specific IP address. You might want to change bind addresses to one interface. Let's say you have one interface on your computer, your virtual machine, that is bound to a WAN, so it's a globally routable internet address, and you have one that's kind of the internal address. You might only want to bind your database to that local internal address. Yeah, so just something to kind of think about. So we're going to try and do this with Postgres as well. You can see again. Let's go look at that. Over here on our first box, you can netstat LDPN. You can see we got Postgres here. It's listening only on localhosts 5432. So I say PSQL. If I say H, it forces TCP again. Localhost, lowercase h, right? Okay. U Postgres, they'll call me for the password, and we can be logged in right there. Alright, so in order to do this, we're going to look at these two log files, or these two configuration files. So they're both in this etc Postgres. The version number, so that is subject to change. A lot of the tutorials you'll see on how to do these things, it will point to something like 8.5 instead of 9.5. Clear CD over there. If I look, I'll have the two that I want to look at. I'll have PGHBA and I'll have Postgres.conf. So I'll look at Postgres.conf first. And what we're going to want to do here is change this listen addresses. So there can actually be multiple addresses here. You could say, localhost right now. If you wanted to grant to one additional IP address, you could say something like 192.168.253.55, again, our other VM. Or what you could do is go ahead and delete all of this. I'm just going to copy it to make sure we save that for later, and then what we can do is just change that to star in this case, and that will listen on all of the addresses. So we'll go back out, We will systemctl restart Postgres QL. That's LTPN. And then we can see we have our Postgres server listening on all interfaces on 5432. So let's go and we can try and log in right now from the other box, PSQL. Need our H, line 2.168.253.54, uppercase U, Postgres. And we can see no PGHBA content tree for host this. So we can actually go, what we're going to have to do next is configure to allow remote access in this configuration file right here. So what we'll have to do is vim pghba hba.conf, and we can see what's allowed right now. So by default, Postgres is allowed to log in as the same user. So peer is just checking the user ID of the user who's connecting. So if we have a user in Postgres, that is actually the Unix user Postgres, it will be allowed to connect to the database. It's actually allowed for all users, so if there's any user that has the same name as the name of the database, it will be currently allowed to connect to the database. And then we will allow connections with a password from localhost, so it will allow it from localhost IPv4, localhost IPv6. So we can expand this to be multiple IP addresses. For right now, I think what we'll do is we will copy this one, and we will just say our one IP address of our other box. So we'll say 192.168.253.55. We will restart. And hopefully that's all we'll have to do. So it's a little bit more promising already because it's actually prompting us for a password. And then look at that, I think we are in. Oh, I always forget this stupid backslash syntax for Postgres. If it actually has database. Whatever, doesn't matter. Cool. So that will not only allow us to, in this case, again, we grant those to a number of different users at once. We could actually go back in here and lock this down a little bit more. Right now we're allowing all of our users remote access. We might not want that. We might only want, let's say, the WordPress user. WordPress user to have remote access. Systemctl restart PostgreSQL. So now if we try and do this again, it will say no entry for host for that user. And it'll just be like, nope, we're not going to do that. But now hopefully when we log in as WordPress, we can still do that. So that's how we lock that down even more. I believe you could also do, I don't know what the exact syntax is for allowing all hosts. I think you might have to if you do 00000/0, that might allow all hosts. But the typical configuration would be you manually allowing one IP address. And we can see that we could allow all hosts by doing that, I guess. All right. So that's pretty much all that we would have to do from an administrative standpoint with our databases. When we're installing these applications, you won't have to really dig into the database as much. What it really will ask you to do was the things that we covered here. We need to be able to add users. We need to be able to basically, well, I guess the first thing we need to do is be able to install the database, be able to add users, be able to grant kind of these remote access permissions, and then hopefully whatever application we're installing, and we're going to look at WordPress in this case, will kind of take care of the rest of it for us. So again, over the next couple of days, we're going to try and get to this point. So with a single box here, and then we're going to have a database on the next box here, and then hopefully, much more so in the future when we are looking at stuff like this, we'll have a load balancer where we'll have two servers processing application logic, and then we'll have a database in the back end which just stores the data. So that's all I have for you today. We're going to look at, again, more of the stuff that we need to do to get all of this working. We're going to look at web servers and PHP on Wednesday and Friday of this week. So that's all I got.